He stuck his finger in the end of your what?
Howdy, everyone. Pull up a chair, kick up your boots, and take a sip on a nice, cold,
Sarsaparilla.
What?
Well, I would write it down, but I don't figure you could read it. Sody pop.
It's Support Your Local Podcast, the show where we take a look at the 1969 Western comedy classic, Support Your Local Sheriff, one chapter at a time. I'm your host, Robert Smith, coming to you from beautiful Tombstone. No, wait, that's a lie. This week, and last week actually, I was coming from the ocean out in North Carolina. We were very fortunate to have a family get-together, all of our kids together and all of the grandkids and babies and all that with my mom, their grandma, their great-grandma. And then this week, I'm actually currently sitting in a Lowe's parking lot in Las Vegas, Nevada, just trying to find a quiet spot to sit down and record before I go to bowl in the USBC Open this year at South Point. So doing what I can to get these episodes out to you guys. I love doing it. Let's keep going. But normally from beautiful Tombstone. Yes, that one. Today we are going to take a look at Chapter 6, Arresting Joe Danby. Where we left off, the sheriff has gotten the grand tour of Casa de Ollie Perkins. He got a nice look at the mayor's organ. And poor Prudy just couldn't catch a break. Everywhere that the sheriff and mayor said that they were going to go in her house, she decided to pick that place to go hide. So ended up chasing her up a tree like a cat. But today, before we jump in, I do want to take a brief moment and just kind of go over the lay of the land, give you an idea of what the world was like in the realm of the podcast, so in 1869, but also in the time where the movie was released, a very, very eventful time in 1969, in a brief segment that I like to call It Came in 69.
That gun had gone off and it blown right up in my face.
Now, it wouldn't have done my finger a hell of a lot of good either, would it?
So in 1869, right around this time, the Cincinnati Red Stockings opened the baseball season as the first fully professional team. Obviously, being an Ohioite, I found this one very interesting because that's the Cincinnati Reds, my former beloved Cincinnati Reds, back when I followed baseball. Sherwood College is founded in Nainital, India. John Wesley Hyatt patents celluloid in Albany, New York. This is obviously very important because without celluloid, we would not be able to watch film. We would not be able to watch this film back in 1969, which is a great segue. I'm going to leave that in. That was clunkier than heck, but hey, I'm not a professional, folks. I'm just a fan. In 1969, 74 U.S. sailors are killed as the destroyer USS Franklin Evans is sliced in half by the Australian aircraft carrier Melbourne during NATO maneuvers off the shore of South Vietnam. Broadway Joe Namath resigns from the NFL prior to Pete Rozelle, the former commissioner, stating he must sell his stake in a bar. The Gibraltar border with Spain, also known as the Fence of Gibraltar, is closed by dictator General Franco. ABC premieres The Johnny Cash Show from the Grand Ole Opry. Bob Dylan is a special guest, including June Carter and the Carter family. The Tennessee Three, the Statler Brothers, and Carl Perkins. I guarantee you, if my dad was near a TV during that time, he was definitely watching that. And shout out to all my Columbo peeps. Johnny Cash, former guest star and murderer on Columbo. Spoilers. President Nixon meets with President of South Vietnam at a joint press conference announcing the reduction of U.S. troops in Vietnam. William Brent, a member of the Black Panther Group, hijacks a U.S. plane to Cuba and becomes the 28th person this year to do so, back when it obviously must have been a lot easier to take over a plane. In London, American film actress Judy Garland, the star of The Wizard of Oz, passes away. The Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, the other side of Ohio, catches fire due to pollution levels in the water. That was in 1969. I'm sure they've done a great job of keeping that clean, and that would never happen again. The Denver Pop Festival opens for 3 days. An estimated 50,000 people attended throughout the event. And New York's Stonewall Inn, an underground gay bar, is raided by police on the grounds the bar refused to pay an increase in bribery. For 3 days, 400 to 1,000 patrons rioted against police, and this clash came to be known as the Stonewall Rebellion, considered the birth of the homosexual rights movement. And this has been It Came in '69.
Wow!
So we start our chapter with the sheriff walking down the boardwalk towards the saloon, and Jake approaches him to let him know that he, in fact, did not go in and tell Joe Danby that he was arrested for murder. When the sheriff asks why, Jake simply tells him the reason is nobody's paying him to get murdered by Joe Danby. When the sheriff asks him why everybody, and Jake included, is scared of Joe Danby, Jake simply says that Joe Danby's mean. Good enough reason, I suppose. The sheriff tries to boost Jake's ego by letting him know that he has nothing to be scared of in regards to Joe Danby, that he's actually seen both of them draw their guns, and that Jake is actually faster on the draw. Jake is in disbelief, but the sheriff does reassure him. The sheriff alludes to the fact that he's in need of a deputy to help him out, and Jake immediately denies this request. Again, he doesn't like a death wish. Apparently, no matter what they're paying them, it's not going to be enough. So no matter what kind of situation Jake is in life, it's not enough to go get killed. He also warns the sheriff that Joe's in the saloon waiting for him because some other people had alerted him to the sheriff coming. And upon every viewing that I watch this, I try to find a facial tic or a tell that shows that Jake was actually the one that alerted Joe Danby. As we go through the movie, you'll see kind of Jake's character, and I don't necessarily think that is the case. He seems like, in his heart of hearts, he is a good guy. But I can't help, these little seeds. I don't know if I'm just really, really cynical and I look for the evil in everybody or what the deal is. But with Jason having a dark past and with Jake being the one that tipped off Joe Danby, I don't know. It's just something that it gnaws at the back of my head. And especially now that I'm sitting there thinking about it, like literally just hit me. When the sheriff first stops the mud fight, Jake is the one that was willing to draw his gun on the sheriff to try to scare him off. And we don't know how that would have ended up because obviously the sheriff was faster, but would Jake have shot the sheriff, but not the deputy? I wonder. So maybe Jake is really more of a rowdy, badder guy than we think. And it's not until he sees the sheriff in action that he decides to throw down on the side of law and order. So just keep an eye on that. Something to take in. I just a thought that hit me as we were going through. So the sheriff leaves Jake on the boardwalk and goes in the saloon doors, and we hear a piano playing as he enters. And as soon as he does, the crowd starts to turn towards the sheriff, and it's a great wide shot where we get a good view of the entirety of the bar, but we still cannot see where the music's coming from. And it makes me wonder, originally when you're first watching it, you think it's just the soundtrack to the movie, but the fact that the music slowed down and stopped as if a piano player took notice that the sheriff walked into the bar, it makes me wonder if this is really a diegetic soundtrack. So this is the music that's playing in the bar that we're meant to hear. And it's also something that's heard by the characters in the movie. So just a thought, but still, we get to see, again, pretty much the entirety of this place. And I've yet to see a piano, a banjo, a harmonica, anything that we hear. I'll be darned if I can tell where they're supposed to be at. But as the sheriff approaches, the music, as I mentioned, slowly starts getting out of tune and tapering off. And it's the equivalent of a Western record scratching. So in today's age, if we had this, it would literally be the sound. Even the crowd goes silent as Joe turns to face the sheriff, and he gets this crap-eating grin on his face, And he says, "So I hear you're going to try to arrest me." Joe continues to talk smack while the sheriff just stands there as stoic as ever. And once Joe finally shuts up, the sheriff reminds him how tiring it is to listen to a man ramble on saying stupid things, even if you have to kill him. And Joe straightens up as if he had been slapped in the face at the mention of somebody trying to kill him. And he starts glancing at the gun hand of the sheriff. And again, great acting by the actor Bruce Dern playing Joe Danby. Just keep an eye on his face. He has really, much like most people in this movie, he just has really great facial tics throughout here. The sheriff notices that Joe is looking at his gun hand, and he politely reminds him that he's seen Joe draw, so he knows exactly how fast Joe is, and he's alluding to the fact that he doesn't know how fast the sheriff is, which, a very useful bit of information if you're going to go into a fight is just how hard does this guy hit, and can this guy hit harder. So, however, if anybody who has been outside during the mud brawl, they would have known and possibly told Joe, hey, the sheriff is a very quick draw. He just did this thing with Jake, who may or may not be the one that told Joe, now that I think about it. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So we have our first Western trope alert of the episode. A shootout in a saloon with an unseen accomplice. The sheriff is interrupted by somebody up on the balcony who has his gun drawn and pointed at the sheriff, and he tells the sheriff to take his gun belt off very slowly, to which the sheriff complies. This is seen in so many other Westerns. Rio Bravo comes to mind, El Dorado comes to mind, where they're coming in to arrest somebody or they're looking for somebody, and one of the accomplices gets the drop on the person that's trying to get the bad guy. I almost said gets the sheriff, but it's not always necessarily the sheriff. Usually what happens is either what happens here in a minute, I don't want to spoil it just yet, or an accomplice of the good guy ends up getting the drop of but I have my gun pointed at you, and it's just a long chain. I'm sure there's been Western comedy spoofs where there's just 16 or 17 different people, but I have a gun on you, but I have a gun on you, but I have a gun on you, but I have a gun on you. I'm sure it may even be in one of the Naked Gun movies. I'm drawing a blank, but I'm sure that exists. So the sheriff does comply. He unbuckles his gun belt, but when he goes to drop it to the ground, his hand reaches for his gun and draws, and he shoots the man from the balcony. We hear two shots when he draws on the man on the balcony, and presumably one was the bullet that killed the man on the balcony, and the other one being from the gun of the man in the balcony. So he got a shot off before he was killed. We quickly hear two more shots, and the sheriff turns to see another man clutching his stomach on the steps, falling over. There's gunpowder flying from his gun, so presumably it was another man getting ready to shoot the sheriff in the back. And we quickly pan over to see that the man that shot him was, in fact, Jake, just coming in the saloon doors. Just a bit of continuity and just what I consider an error. Jake must be using some sort of powderless gun because, again, we saw a puff of powder from the man up on the balcony's gun, so we know that he took a shot. We see a puff of powder from the gun of the man on the stairs that Jake shot, but somehow as we pan not even a second over from the shot to Jake, his gun has no gunpowder coming out of it. So Jake reminds the sheriff that he couldn't let the person shoot him in the back, and the sheriff, of course, reminds him that, I'm pretty sure you could have. Seeing that the sheriff is distracted with the Jake situation, Joe begins to walk away, but the sheriff points his gun at Joe without actually looking him in the eyes, panning the room for any other people that wanted to jump into the fight, which was I thought was a nice touch, a nice bit of acting. He clicks his fingers and asks for Joe's gun, to which Joe readily applies. And again, another bit of cowardly acting by Joe. Keep an eye on this, that once the blowhard bully has been kind of triumphed or stood up to, he cowers pretty quickly and pretty easily. So you see Joe really, with his hands up, really leery of the sheriff. He takes two fingers and very daintily takes the gun out of his holster and hands it to the sheriff, just so that there's no confusion and he doesn't end up getting shot. Again, just a great bit of acting by Bruce Stern. So obviously he knows the sheriff means business and is a far better draw than he is. The sheriff chastises the crowd and wonders if it's the kind of town that he wants to lead after all, because there's been 3 murders in this one building alone and it's not even sundown. He threatens the barkeep that he will shut the bar down if there's any more murders that day. I found this interesting because that's kind of another Western trope that apparently the sheriff already knows that the 2 people that were shot just seconds ago have already passed on. They've already shuffled off the mortal coil. Despite the fact that both of them appear to have been shot in the belly, which in other movies you'll find that tends to be a much slower, drawn-out death. To the sheriff's credit, a almost certain death. But in Westerns, you always had the guys that kind of clenched up and grabbed their stomach and fell over, presumably to die. So another Western trope. He has Joe clean up his gun belt and escorts him towards the door. As Joe passes by Jake, he pokes his finger at Jake's chest and threatens him, to which the sheriff says what he's been thinking all along, and that Joe is just a big bag of hot air, always a blowhard, being a bully to everyone he pushes him out the door. The sheriff hands Jake Joe's extra gun and reminds him that now he's on the sheriff's side, whether he chose to or not. He should probably follow him to the jail. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Just rolling out the Western tropes now. They're hot and heavy rolling out. The reluctant deputy or the reluctant help, getting themselves into trouble for the side of good without necessarily wanting to. Jake has the sheriff's back as they leave, warning the crowd that he and the sheriff now are a team and they don't take too kindly to show-offs with guns. The crowd just stares at Jake blankly as he walks through the door. Apparently all of Joe's friends have either been murdered or they've seen that they don't want to tangle with these guys. As soon as they leave, the bartender announces, "You heard what the sheriff said, no more killings till sundown," which is, it's an interesting interpretation of what the sheriff said, but it's not completely inaccurate. He then announces that drinks are on the house and the crowd goes wild. So we hear the music kick back on with the banjo, the harmonica, and the piano, wherever those may be in the saloon. So just another reason why I think that this is more diegetic music. We cut over to the sheriff, Jake, and Joe entering the jail, and the music is still playing in the background, which I thought was a nice little touch of continuity. If you look at our clock, it is now 10 after 4. And so keep in mind with our sheriff's time management skills, I'm not sure he quite made his deadline. He may have been messing around a little bit more with the mayor's house than he thought. But still, we got Joe in jail as promised. As Jake and Jason are bickering back and forth on whether he's going to become a deputy, Joe once again tries to take this opportunity to just quietly walk away in the background. Again, as this argument's going on, in fact, just throughout the rest of this movie, anytime that Joe Danby's on the screen, I don't say ignore what's going on in the movie because I want you to enjoy the movie still, but just keep an eye on Joe because his actions and his facial expressions really are a piece of gold in this movie. So he sees that in reality, neither of these guys are really paying attention to him right now. They're arguing. So while mommy and daddy fight, I'm going to go and go play in my room. I'll just help myself out. Just a nice little touch. The sheriff does notice that he's going, and he asks him where he thinks he's going, and Jake pulls his gun on Joe and keeps him in the jail while Joe argues on why he has to listen to Jake, who is just the town character. This is all Jake needs to do to be convinced, and he announces himself proudly as the new deputy sheriff. The sheriff takes Joe back to the jail cell, sans bars, of course. The sheriff tells Joe that we're going to pretend that the bars exist and just operate just as if they did. Someone is a little slow-witted as Joe is confused by this, obviously trying to grasp the concept of pantomime, and he initially refuses to play along with this charade. He notices the red stuff on the floor by the jail cell, and the sheriff informs him that that was just a little bit of blood from the last guy that refused to stay behind the chalk line. This twitch snaps Joe to attention, and again, in a nice bit of cowardice, he immediately snaps into compliance and removes his hat and leaps, literally bounds into the jail cell, sitting quietly and waiting for further instructions. As Joe sits there patiently, now would be a good time to catch up on the man behind the character, one Mr. Bruce Dern, in a segment I call Remember the Name.
That's about all I'm going to do the rest of my life is go around remembering your name.
So today on Remember the Name, we get to take a look at the character that actually gets to utter that line in the movie. Of course, we're talking about our main antagonist, Joe Danby, played by the character actor Bruce Dern. Doing research for him, some of the things that kind of stood out for me. Interesting note, his grandfather was former governor of Utah, and when Bruce was born in 1936, his grandfather was actually the Secretary of War under FDR. Eleanor Roosevelt, FDR's wife, of course, was actually Bruce's babysitter. So very cool upbringing, some notes that you don't necessarily get when you're looking at Hollywood actors. Bruce Dern, of course, father of Laura Dern, Jurassic Park, Star Wars, lots of fame there as well. Laura Dern, his daughter with his then wife, Diane Ladd, of course, another famous actress. Bruce is a veteran of over 100 movies. One that stands out most is in 1972, so not quite there yet once this movie came out. But in 1972, he starred as the villain in The Cowboys. And that movie is infamous, to say the least, in regards to it's the only movie where somebody kills John Wayne. And guess who gets to do it? It was actually Bruce Dern. So Bruce Dern is known primarily of people of the 70s as the dirty rascal that shot John Wayne. I know anybody that listens to the Jim Ross podcast, Grillin' JR, he still to this day throws those references out there when he talks about a great villain and uses Bruce Dern as that example as the man that shot John Wayne, because back then you just didn't do that. John Wayne was the anti-Sean Bean. He just did not die in movies. It didn't happen. So to have somebody actually take John Wayne out on screen was a huge deal. Something that was serious enough where Bruce Dern, the actor, keep in mind, guys, this is a movie. Bruce Dern actually was getting death threats sent to him because he shot John Wayne in a movie. So that's how serious entertainment was. Anybody that makes fun of wrestling and people thinking that it's still real, there was a Western movie. It wasn't even portrayed as being real. That led people to give death threats to Bruce Dern for shooting John Wayne. Bruce, born June 4th, 1936. He is still with us as of this recording. He is still active. He's recently been in a lot of Quentin Tarantino films, so you can see him in Django Unchained, The Hateful Eight, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So just a couple notes on his career. 1975, he's a Golden Globe nominee for The Great Gatsby, Best Supporting Actor. 1979, he got a nomination for Golden Globe and an Academy Award for his Best Supporting Actor role in Coming Home. 2014, so even as recent, so keep in mind, this movie that we're watching is in 1969. In 2014, he got a Golden Globe and Academy Award nomination for Best Actor for his role in Nebraska. He has been nominated for all these awards. He has not won. The only thing I saw that of note that he did win was he did get a Best Actor win at the Cannes Film Festival for his role in Nebraska. So Bruce, known in this movie for his wiry, weaselly look as the villain, comes from his time as a competitive distance runner. That's where he gets his lean figure from. Something that he still does to this day. He's very active in running and staying healthy. Probably one of the reasons why he's still with us today. So born 1936, we're looking at a movie in 1969. He's already 35 in this movie, 33 in this movie. Still doing movies today and of a high caliber, getting that nomination in 2014. So keep an eye out for Mr. Dern. We're going to see a lot of him during this movie, but this has been Remember the Name.
You
Tell him I remember his name.
Hello, I'm Robert T. Smith, host of Support Your Local Podcast. I want to take a moment to remind you to hit that fast forward button. That is, unless you want to hear about something good being done. Anyone who knows me knows that I love bowling. In 2016, I founded the Smith Family Bowling Scholarship Foundation, intended to honor my father's hard work and dedication to community service and award scholarships to youth bowlers throughout the nation. To date, we've awarded well over $15,000 in scholarships. If you are a bowler, know a bowler, have ever seen a bowler, or heard about anyone who has ever seen a video of a bowler, I'd love for you to help promote the SFBSF and its mission. Please go to sfbsf.com and see what we're all about. While you're there, please consider hitting that donate button and helping us make a brighter future for our youth. Again, that's sfbsf.com. Thank you for your time. And we're back. While the sheriff returns to the main room, Jake has found his deputy badge. I can't see any bullet holes in this one, so it appears to be fully intact. So perhaps they've never had a deputy. Perhaps the deputies have just had a little bit better luck than the sheriff's. Who knows? But he starts to inquire on what he would be paid for the job, and the sheriff tells him it'd be about half of what the sheriff's was, so right around $75 a month plus room and board. And as we mentioned, with the sheriff's salary being right around $60,000 a year, that would make Jake's roughly around 30 in 2022 money. Jake has a glimmer of hope of getting out of all this when the sheriff reminds him that he hasn't ran his employment past the mayor and town council yet. However, he's reminded that anybody that's probably willing to do the job, they're going to be okay with. Any sucker will do, apparently. Jake then crosses the room to sit down in a chair in a nice bit of business. Despite his dustiness and mud-caked clothes, he wipes off the chair before he sits down. So just a nice little bit of business by Jack Elam. Jake begins to question the sheriff about his background, whether he's been a sheriff before, which he hasn't, where he's from, which is back east, being very vague. He says he's been out west for about 4 years, and this again leads me to question on the background of the sheriff and whether it was originally supposed to be a little bit darker, having more secrets. This also falls into the idea of the Let It Go Smith conspiracy that I mentioned in a previous episode, that the sheriff is actually his self-same James Garner character in the quote-unquote sequel, Support Your Local Gunfighter. Jake is even more curious as to why the sheriff is trying to get to Australia, and this definitely piques the interest of the sheriff. Up until then, he had kind of been very dismissive of Jake and his questions. But if he gets to talk about Australia, then he's all in. You can tell that he really enjoys talking about it, despite the fact that he's never been there. So I think that Australia is just this concept that he's fascinated with. He jumps up to tell Jake about kangaroos and boomerangs and such, and we get a really good look at some of the wanted posters on the wall. From what I can read of the names, I can't find any historical names listed on there, nor do I see where it's a name of any of the production crew or anything like that. What I found interesting is in researching those names, trying to find out if these people existed. Again, I couldn't find anything current to where it would have been somebody as a member of the crew. But when I typed in their names, even if I didn't put wanted poster in the search bar, one of the first hits on Google was a wanted posters, like not database, but where you could purchase old Western wanted posters. And what I found even more interesting about that was when you clicked on it or you read the little blurb underneath the link, those names didn't exist in there. So, for instance, like we said, the Ben Silas one was a reused one from Gunsmoke. But there's one that appears to be like Red Holmes, a couple other ones. And they didn't pop up, but yet a wanted posters database store, like an eBay store or whatever, did pop up. So a little bit interesting. One day I'll have to do a little bit deeper digging and see what's going on with that. But I just found it pretty cool. We fade away to now the sheriff and Jake being out back of the jail. And the sheriff is nailing a board to a tree for target practice for Jake. Keep a good eye, as I said before, on Joe hanging out the window behind them. The first couple times I watched this movie, I didn't see him there in the beginning. And a joke that's going to happen here soon, it will make a lot more sense when you see that Joe had started out in the window. The sheriff once again shows his marksmanship by shooting a nail and a board from several feet away. And this leads Jake to mention that it's weird that somebody that can shoot that well doesn't have a reputation or a name. Once again, if it's Latigo Smith, that's why you don't know the name of Jason. And as the sheriff explains the reputation will only get you killed, we see Joe quietly leaving the window. This is a nice bit of business where he consistently uses conversation between the sheriff and somebody else as a means of escape. Spoiler, it never really works, but it is a nice bit of business. The sheriff seemingly doesn't see Joe by looking back and noticing that he had left, but he does tell Jake to keep practicing while he goes and puts Joe back into jail. Again, great acting. Several bits in this movie where James Garner is looking one direction but doing something in another or noticing something in another. Just a nice little character trait. This initially doesn't sink in with Jake until he realizes what the sheriff said and then looks at the window and knows that Joe is in fact missing. We cut to the front of the sheriff's office and Joe carrying his items and tiptoeing down the boardwalk, leaving the door. But as we pan across, we see the sheriff at the corner waiting for him, and we hear in the background at least 3 shots from Jake, which is interesting since there were only 2 nails that he was shooting at. So obviously Jake probably still needs a little bit of work. It makes you wonder if he actually even hit one of them, to be honest. As Joe is startled by the sheriff, he goes to pull his gun, but the sheriff just puts his hand up and reminds him that he already removed the bullets from the gun. So Joe is just bound and determined to use his bully voice to get past the sheriff. Obviously, it's something that has been very effective in his life for him to keep defaulting back to that. But he just doesn't seem to realize that the sheriff is above that. He threatens the sheriff with his brothers and his father coming into town when they find out that Joe's in jail. And the sheriff simply states that he wants to meet all the Danbys. And this is a look of shock on Joe's face, as I'm sure that the type of threat has gotten him out of so many situations in the past. And again, as we find how squirrely and cowardly that Joe becomes once people stand up to him, I hearken back to the second chapter where the mayor and the town council make the comment that Joe is probably the second toughest. So we'll have to keep an eye on the rest of the Danbys and see just how cowardly or bullyish that they are, or if they're just a bunch of blowhards like Joe, who is easily the smallest of the group, with the exception of maybe Paul. The sheriff leads Joe back into the jail and back into his cell. He finds it funny that Joe mentions that his father would be upset that he got caught, but not that he committed a murder. Speaks to the character of these guys. As Joe's talking with the sheriff about whether or not there's a judge in these territories, the sheriff begins to unload Joe's gun of all the bullets that supposedly weren't in there. And top 5 jokes of the movie. Keep track. I probably have about 6 or 7 top 5 jokes, but the look on Bruce Dern's face as he sees this happening is priceless. The look of shock as the bullets are falling out, and the fact that he even has a bit of a crack in his voice as he tells the sheriff that it's funny, real funny, is some acting gold. I mean, it is on the level of the teenage kid from The Simpsons, like, oh, that's funny, real funny. Like, you can tell that Bruce Dern was getting himself emotional for this bit. And as we fade away, the sheriff walks away and Joe sits there handcuffed, now knowing that the joke was, in fact, on him. But that's where we close our chapter today, Arresting Joe Danby. We will return next week with Chapter 7, Prudy's Bad Day. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. We look forward to doing this again. If you haven't already, please go find us on social media. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can find us all at Support Your Local Podcast. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, I would love to hear from you. Please hit me up at Sup Your Local Podcast. That's SUPP yourlocalpodcast@gmail.com. Apparently, Gmail does not like emails that start with support, so I had to do that. I apologize for the confusion. If you haven't already, if this is your first listen, if you just happen to randomly hit us up on episode 6, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcatchers. We're available on Spotify, Google, Apple, Overcast, Stitcher, you name it, we are available. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave and rate and review us, please. That's how we get noticed by more people is we move up in the rankings by being rated and reviewed. If it is a 5-star rating, thank you. I appreciate that. If it's going to be a bad one, hey, still hit me a 5-star rating, but let me know what I can do better. I'm out to do this for the long haul, for a lot more movies after this one. So I want to make this as good as I can. I want to give you just a little bit of entertainment every week. I look forward to that. So please, any comments, any feedback, let me know. Hit us up on social media. But until then, wish me luck. Hopefully I will throw balls and knock down pins and be back in beautiful Tombstone just in time to record our next episode, again, Chapter 7. But until then, as always, thank you so much for your time and support your local podcast.
He stuck his finger in the end of your what?